We're delighted to welcome you back to the 14th Jaipur Literature Festival here at Digi Palace, protected by Dettol. Today's session is produced in partnership with the European Union. It is our pleasure to present Dream Sequence, Adam Foulds in conversation with Elaine Canning. In his clever, deliciously funny and insightful new novel, Dream Sequence, award-winning British novelist Adam Foulds takes on the nature of artistic ambition, loneliness, and obsession in contemporary society. The book follows the travails of Henry, an Oxbridge-educated television actor from a family of frustrated artists as he navigates stardom and celebrity, eventually emerging as a sharp and eviscerating social critique. In conversation with Executive Officer of Swansea's University's International Dylan Thomas Prize, Elaine Canning, he talks of the process of penning his vision and the blurring of borders between real and real life. Adam Foulds was born in London. He's the author of 4 novels and a book-length narrative poem. He's been the recipient of numerous literary awards, including the European Union Prize for Literature. Elaine Canning is a writer and the Executive Officer of Swansea University's Dylan Thomas Prize. Please do remember to comment by typing it into the comment section below. Ladies and gentlemen, Dream Sequence, Adam Foulds in conversation with Elaine Canning.
Welcome, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here. It's lovely to see you.
It's very nice to see you too.
What a joy to be part of this wonderful festival in its wonderful version. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today to talk to you about your latest novel, Dream Sequence. At the centre of this novel, we've got Henry Banks, who is an ambitious solipsistic actor, made his career in television in a TV period drama for 6 years, and is now hoping to become a film star, break into the world of the film industry. And alongside Henry, we have Kristen, who is an obsessed fan, recently divorced, living in California. So I wanted to begin by asking you about the title of this wonderful novel, Dream Sequence, because it really captures in many ways the notion of the dream and the magical, which not only infiltrates the novel, but really permeates it. It seeps right into the narrative. We get that through the succession of dreamlike scenarios and references and thought processes of characters and the ambitions of the main characters. So I wondered if we could begin by asking you to talk to us a little bit about this blurring of the dream and the magical and reality within the novel.
Sure. Well, the title really was to kind of capture and hold together those ideas. I'd noticed, well, first of all, I guess the phrase dream sequence came to me as a term from the film business, from dream sequences in movies. And then I noticed that in the word dream, we have this double meaning of both, we use it to mean an ambition, something that we aspire to, and also something that is unreal, something that is a fantasy. And so those two meanings merged together are very important for both of these characters who have this very intense sense of something coming for them in the future that they really ought to achieve and that will change their lives in a really transformative way. So there's a sense there also of there being this ideal, dream as in ideal, and another kind of meaning of the word, sequence of events that they're looking to unfold. And I think partly the whole book came out of my feeling that there's more and more kind of saturation of fantasy and a kind of liquefying of reality in people's minds that's happening in the contemporary moment in a number of ways, partly in our online lives and our consumerist lives and our political lives. We're entering our own kind of dream sequences very frequently, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you really interrogate that world of television versus film for Henry, and we get that very early on in the novel, don't we, where he talks about playing a part in television but being in film. And so he talks about film and the world, and it merging with his world. So I wondered if you could perhaps give us a little bit of a flavour of Henry from the beginning of the novel.
Sure. I should read a little section where we're just meeting him for the first time. And we're seeing how he sees himself. And in that moment, we get to see him also. So at this point, he's been dieting, starving himself really, in order to lose weight, for, kind of unnecessarily, for an audition with a famous kind of art house film director, who this is the job that he really wants after his, what he thinks is slightly kind of cheesy, kind of corny fame in a Sunday night TV show. This will allow him to enter the world of the sort of Benedict Cumberbatch type, international star movie actors. And so this is him the morning of that audition. He dressed. He ran his hands down the smoothness of his abdomen. His body was tight. His trousers hung from his hip bones. He chose a khaki linen shirt with button-down pockets that he thought had the right sort of feel, serious, adaptable, with connotations of the military and the desert. Henry checked how he looked in the mirror. Henry's face was something everybody had to deal with, to assimilate and get over, even Henry. When Henry caught sight of his face, he often felt as though he were arriving late at something already happening. His face looked so finished and authoritative. He had the approved lines, the symmetry. He looked how a man should look. His handsomeness could be a shock as much as for him as for others, who sometimes also had to process their recognition of him, their sensation of an untethered and inexplicable intimacy. Occasionally, Henry thought that it would be nice, warm and relaxed and human to be a little ugly, to have a face that showed personality in pouches under the eyes or a large, soft mouth, the face of a character actor expressing suffering and humour. His own good looks were bland, Henry thought, mainstream, televisual. Hunger seemed to be improving it, its calm masculinity, now fretted with sharpness and shadows.
Fantastic, thank you. I love the attention to detail. It really is part of this obsessive nature of Henry's in the novel. How he zooms in and analyzes every detail, and we get that with Kristen too, don't we? When we meet her, she's in this beautiful empty house, but she's already redecorating her marriage, and she's already redecorating her house, and she's obsessively watching the series episodes of The Grange, which is Henry's program, and she hears the voices when she's going to her yoga class. She hears these voices in her head and so on. And I wanted to ask you about this sort of idea of symmetry between those characters, because they are both, they are physically very distant at the beginning. Henry's in London and she's in California, and in the course of the novel she makes her way to London.
Pennsylvania.
In Pennsylvania, sorry. And in the course of the novel she makes her way to London. So they're physically distanced. Yes. But in terms of this obsessive nature of their characters, are there similarities between them?
Yes. They're both partake of this kind of psychosis of the time, to put it kind of more severely than I mean in a way. What happened, I think, in part was at a certain point I realized that I was dealing with a mythic pair, that what I had on my hands with these two characters was Echo and Narcissus. So Henry is the Narcissus figure who is, he is for himself and absorbed in his own image, and she is the Echo who pursues him and wants to be near him and feels, is it always in relation to him. And once I realized that, then a lot of things became kind of clear about the novel, about their relationship, and also about the structure of the novel to some extent, that it begins and ends with her. And we spend a lot of time with him in the middle. We see her then through this kind of middle of the novel approaching him, these sort of converging lines, until finally they meet. But so really that there is records kind of formally the sense that he is for himself and she kind of wraps around him.
Mm-hmm. And there's a beautiful line towards the beginning of the novel when she is out walking and she's on her way to yoga, and she talks about there's a reference to Henry, and Henry being everywhere and nowhere, shaping everything. And as you said, you begin and end the novel with Kristen rather than Henry. I just wondered to what extent Kristen is everywhere and nowhere in the course of the novel as well.
I think that's right. And I think that's because this kind of fantasy, this kind of sense of connection is also everywhere and nowhere. And it's also real and unreal. And I think we all, Kristen is experiencing something that lots of us experience, by which I mean, it's real for her. She has briefly met him on one occasion, we find out, in an airport just by chance. And this is an incredibly meaningful experience for her that really alters the shape and content of her life. So there is a reality there. And then, she follows him in the press. She's constantly aware, as much as she can be, of where he is and what he's up to and what he looks like. And we can all kind of do this on, through social media now, is that we can in real time know where particular famous people that we're interested, where they are, what they're thinking. We can interact with them, we can kind of touch, we can respond to their things. They might even like, they may even literally themselves respond to us in a way that, used to be a very rare occurrence. So we have the sense that there is this, that can't be kind of gainsaid. That is a real thing, that is a real connection. And yet it is just kind of saturated with fantasy and doesn't really mean what we might hope it would mean in a real kind of social sense.
Sure. I mean, she talks about them as twin souls, doesn't she?
Yeah, that's different. That's a kind of philosophy of romantic connection that's really quite fully thought out, that I came across in my reading and thinking about these characters, that there's a school of kind of self-help / spiritual book writing about the idea of twin souls. And if you know you are a twin soul with some other person that you can't be with, maybe they're married or whatever, married to someone else for whatever reason, then there are people talking through how you understand what it is to be a twin soul with someone, whether you can, encouraging people to maybe relax and wait for their next incarnation when twin souls will be reunited. So it's a kind of romantic love that takes on a very sort of theological, mystical aspect. And again, she's an extreme case, but there's a kind of mysticism abroad in the culture at the moment that I was interested in. We hear quite often people talking about, this is something the universe wants for me. And we all have that sense of like fate and things that are meant to be. To some extent, we're all susceptible to a bit of that magical thinking. For Kristen is really just an impulse that we all have, kind of, that gets unbounded and extreme.
Yeah, and I mean, she does talk about her future with Henry, and it will happen. She's very self-assured when she sets out on this quest. And Henry equally, in terms of his career, certainly at the beginning, he is sure of he talks about his glorious future, and then there is that part where that does change for Henry, and he talks about the invitation to failure when he actually, where he finds himself with Miguel Garcia, the auteur, very successful filmmaker, with whom he wishes to work. And I think what's really interesting as well, and you've touched on it already, is this the relationship in the novel between the way in which Kristen communicates with Henry, so, and the way she makes contact. So you talked about social media and the internet and so on. So, for example, we know very early on that she's receiving Google alerts and Twitter notifications, but we also know that she's handwriting letters to which are posted, you know, covered with butterflies and so on. And there's also a number of chance encounters and fate, as you mentioned. So I wondered why you decided within the novel, why you decided to combine the social media and online access along with more traditional modes of letter writing, for example, and that idea of fate and coincidence.
Well, that's the letter writing really is a character choice about Kristen, in that it's part of her vision of the difference of her relationship with Henry from other people's, and that there's a kind of a slightly kitschy, kind of chivalric, romantic. There's a sort of historical fantasy in there as well, of you know, of the gentleman and lady kind of archetype pair in there. So there's some preciousness in the true sense of the word, in the way that she wants to write letters and have physical objects and have that kind of analog connection that will set her apart from whatever, you know. It allows her to keep herself separate, keep her fantasy separate from all the other fantasies that she might see occurring. It allows her to maintain a sense of difference about what she has with Henry. And the coincidence, I mean, I don't think that it's a terribly like tall order of coincidence. You know, she gets to where he is. I mean, in some sense stalks him, although, I mean, it's not, I'm very wary of using the word stalking because she's a very benign character, really, and stalking is a very different sort of thing. It tends not to be women. Stalking is, you know, is a horrible crime, and it tends to be ex-boyfriends by and large are the people who stalk others. So but nevertheless, she is in pursuit, and she is, you know, doing her detective work to locate him, and is successful. But that's, you know, so the fate, the coincidence, the sense that the universe wants things for you, wants these doors to open, is one narrative on top of a very determined attempt to make these things happen. So she makes fate happen for her.
Yeah, I think what really struck me as well in reading it was, you know, going back to the letter writing, you know, and this sort of almost this romanticizing of the relationship with Henry, that, you know, she herself links with the letter writing on stage when she goes and sees Henry's father's play, The Runaways, and she sees that there's this sort of more traditional sort of romantic connection with Henry, and it's almost, you know, it's setting herself apart, you know. Certainly that's how I read it. And there are, throughout the novel, there are lovely recurring images, which I wanted to talk to you about. I've mentioned the image of the butterfly, and, you know, Kristen is determined that her date with Henry will be to the butterfly exhibit at the National History Museum. You've got the Spider-Man figure, you've got water, and so on. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit about the significance of those recurring images.
Well, butterflies have this kind of mystical aura about them. And they're often part of imagery of kind of self-fulfillment. And obviously there's the transformation story in the butterfly, and a very intense sense of beauty. So really it's all those things that we associate with butterflies that make them part of an image world of romantic fantasy, and particular, and fulfillment. The Spider-Man figure, this is a toy that is given to her when we first encounter Kristin, we learn that she has been divorced. She married an older man, a wealthy older man, who then later divorced her. And as a result, she lost a relationship with her stepson. This is something that kind of intrigued me that I hadn't thought about much actually before writing the novel, is when people enter marriages where there are stepchildren, what becomes of those relationships after divorce. And she was obviously very fond of this boy, and he was very fond of her. And he's given her this Spider-Man toy. Secretly, she discovers it in her bag in the airport on the day that she meets Henry, randomly, genuinely randomly. And so that figure counts for this sort of lost relationship. And I'm not sure I can explain it beyond that, but it's a totem of that loss in her life, and it's meaningful that we understand that she's experienced this kind of loss, and that there is a space that she's trying to fill, not directly with the relationship of this boy, but that there's separation and loss and loneliness there that is looking for healing, looking for both of them really, looking for some kind of totalizing experience that's going to lift them out of their sense of being single, broken, partial. And these are very deep human impulses. We're all, single, broken and partial, and we all want something to, at times, to kind of enfold us and affirm us and transform us. And I think, yes, that little plastic Spider-Man toy is this kind of pathetic image of that part of her sense of being in the world. Water, I don't know. I hadn't noticed that water comes out of it, but I mean, obviously I know it's significant in the book, but I hadn't thought about it on a metaphorical level.
That's interesting, because I was really taken by the shift and the transition between things like flight and water, and the use of how you take your characters, and we will go on to talk about Virginia in a moment. The characters out on water in Qatar, and how you use that in order to be able to make a very scathing social critique of that moment, but equally how important water is at the end of the novel, without giving anything away. But we're in a section of the book which is all about flight, and water becomes highly significant at the end of the novel in terms of Kristin and her relationship with Henry. But I wanted to ask you also about this idea that we've already touched on, of hunger in the novel, hunger and this sense of craving. Because when we first meet Henry in the section you read for us, that section actually begins with a line where we're told the hunger was beginning to hurt. And so, I mean, hunger is something we associate very, physically with Henry. We also have the incident where Virginia is teaching him how to eat tissues, to swallow tissues as a way to fill himself up and so on. But I wondered about that, the idea of that, and that is a metaphorical motif in relation to Kristin, because certainly when I read the novel, I got this sense of this person who was so obsessed with this man, would go to any lengths. So she locks herself away in her hotel room. She does a little bit of sightseeing. But as an individual, she's beginning slowly to disintegrate a little bit, for me, certainly, because Henry is all consuming. He absolutely takes over her life. So I just wondered about the significance of that sense of hunger and craving, not in relation to Henry, where it's very explicit, but more in relation to Kristin.
Yeah, well, it's definitely, I mean, it's there for both of them. And it's a way of, as you say, of physicalizing this sense of desire. Hunger is, the book is a lot to do with desire, and in a way is a critique of desire as a way of kind of structuring your life, or having desire as a dominant experience of how you interact with the world, and a sense of wanting from the world. And in Henry's case, you know, there were literary models that I wanted to kind of maybe come to people's minds, or certainly were in my mind as I was writing him, in Knut Hamsun's novel Hunger, or you know, more obviously perhaps Kafka's The Hunger Artist. You know, someone who performs hunger, which is what he's going to do in this movie if he gets it. He's going to put it's a role of a kind that lots of actors like to get, where it involves quite a major body transformation. You know, how actors can really feel how serious they are when they put on a lot of weight or lose a lot of weight for a role. This is a role that would involve losing a lot of weight. So it would be a performance of hunger that would be kind of validating and in a loop of desire and representation for Henry. But yes, certainly Hunger is all about desiring, and is all about emptiness and needing something that you don't have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to move us on a little bit away from Henry and Kristen now, to focus on Virginia, who I absolutely adored in the novel, because we obviously have this social critique of Henry's world, and of, you know, the consequences of fame and fantasy and obsession and all of that. But into this world, you also bring Virginia, who is a model, who meets Henry in Qatar, who is in that world, but actually is capable of being able to be very direct and open about what she sees in that world and beyond. So she, for me, is a way of opening up, broadening the scope of the novel and the scope of the world that Henry inhabits. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about the significance of Virginia within the novel.
Well, I mean, I think you put that beautifully. I mean, that's really what she does, and that sense that you know, she's in this world but not of it, was very important, and partly that derives for me from her coming from a far less privileged background. That modelling was a career that opened up, and is actually very hard and often very low paid career for lots of very young women. That she comes from a kind of hard scrabble background, basically, and this gives her much more perspective on what actually on living in this world in order to survive and to thrive for herself, rather than expecting some other kind of intellectual, spiritual fulfillment that is really a misplaced search in the world of media and entertainment.
Yeah. I mean, there are just there's so many gorgeous moments in there. I mean, the dialogue is just so special. Once Virginia gets going, and once she has her, you know, her platform, you know, when she talks about Henry as your people and a famous, you know, and she's got these various sort of labels that she uses, and she talks about them as ornaments of the capitalist system. As well, and she is looking around, and she's kind of assessing what is going on around that world. I wondered if you could give us a little bit of a flavour of Virginia,
sure,
with Henry.
This should involve accents, but I won't inflict my attempt on you. So Virginia is an American, and as you mentioned, they meet at a film festival in Doha in Qatar, and she is a sort of like a promo girl, basically. She's amongst a bunch of models who are sort of ushering people to their seats, and being in a very purely kind of ornamental, subservient role. And then Henry takes her back to his hotel, and this is her reaction. "Holy shit, your hotel is so much grander than ours. We're talent. We're the hot cultural commodity. And we're air stewardesses is what it feels like. Still, I bet yours is better than what the Bangladeshis and Nepalis are in, the guys building this place. They live in actual labor camps, apparently. That's no good. I know. Check out those chandeliers. Virginia looked up into the vast hotel atrium. She said, "I'm not sure you really care about the workers." "I care. I do charity work. I care. I mean, if they just pulled their fingers out and developed some basic acting skills, they could be in here rather than out there. If they just put on the old production of Twelfth Night instead of building football stadiums the whole time. Bit of initiative, that's all." "You're a bad man." "That's right. Okay, I need to find out where this bar is." So it's a tiny scrap of dialogue, but you can see where I was trying to, enfold there in the setting of Qatar and these extraordinary luxury hotels that exist there at the same time that vast numbers of incredibly low-paid workers are living and dying, currently building football stadiums for the World Cup that's planned there. And very much wanting to see the kind of entertainment industrial complex, in that context.
Yeah, and it's through that dialogue also that we get, it's those questions or those statements that Virginia makes that brings out that side of Henry very specifically. We just get much more of an insight into him, I think, through his conversations with her, because he's very explicit and he's very direct, and she brings that out in him. And there are other characters in the novel that do that too, that we get. I'm thinking of Henry's parents. So, the domestic and how the domestic infiltrates the novel through his parents, because his parents very much, the communication and the contact with them is through phone calls and messages and so on. They're both frustrated artists. His father gets his play onto into a fringe venue, as Henry reminds us, after he's had a very successful run in Hamlet. And I just wondered about the relationship between them, and the way in which you bring his parents into the novel in part 2, in that wonderful scene in the restaurant, because within that you absolutely exemplify what that relationship between them is. I wondered why it was important for you to extend the world of Henry out a little bit further, and to bring in a relationship with his parents and the brother who's away.
Yeah, well, I wanted to understand Henry as much as possible as a real multi-dimensional person. That's the kind of character writing that I'm interested in, is as much like a real human being as I can make them.
Yeah.
And I know, I absorbed a lot of interviews and actors' biographies, in various forms. We all do, but I did, with a particular sense of purpose towards the writing of this novel. And I did notice very often that there's this, that there's a lack in their childhood of affirmation of a certain kind that leads performers, to go outside the home looking for approval and looking for that kind of sustaining sense of self that approval gives them. And that's what you find is going on, that everyone in this family is a kind of wounded narcissist, that they all have their ambitions and their dreams, and they all are looking for someone to affirm them, and they're all incapable of doing it for each other, really. And so, the dinner scene with his parents, and there are flashbacks to his childhood as well, briefly, is all to kind of fill out that sense of why this was Henry's predicament, and to make that a sympathetic predicament for the reader, not to think of him as obnoxious purely. He isn't that, and he has psychic wounds that he is trying to deal with, and is dealing with in his own way, incredibly kind of energetically and creatively. And likewise, as you say, when he's with Virginia, you realize that he's not a superficial person. He's an intelligent guy. He's presumably reading sort of the Guardian newspaper. He knows more or less what's going on in the world, and has what we think of as the kind of the right thoughts about them, pretty much. So he's not a kind of in an airlock of his own sort of selfish delusion. He's in the world, and he's sympathetic, but he's just particularly driven in this extreme way.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to go back a little bit to the way in which the novel developed, and the way in which it was conceptualized. By that I mean the way in which, without giving anything away, the way in which the relationship between Henry and Kristen develops, and the way in which we are introduced to those characters and encounter those characters throughout is done in a brilliantly original way. So we are with them, but we're not always with them, particularly in the case of Kristen. I wondered whether the way in which the narrative has developed, was that always your intention? Was it always your intention to bring Kristen in at the various points of the novel where she appears?
Yeah, yes. I mean, obviously these forms emerge over time, but it became, I mean, I would say there was a pivotal moment, as I've mentioned earlier, of understanding them as a version of the myth of Echo and Narcissus. Yeah. And that really was a very useful insight. Partly that determined the nature of the ending, in that a lot of these Greek myths are really topographical, or myths about that explain natural phenomena. So, you know, Echo Narcissus explains an echo's relation to a source sound, and that sense of proximity. And the Narcissus is obviously there's the transformation into the flower that looks downwards into its own reflection. But there's a kind of geographical relation that is established, that is described in the myth, and that's where it kind of resolves, is in this relation that sort of is presumed as kind of eternal positioning of these elements towards each other. And that's a version of what I was doing in the ending, where she ends up relative to where Henry is and to Henry's apartment. They're in this, it's meant to kind of freeze them in this eternal predicament, and in a snapshot of their relationship as it will always be, and as the relationship of people in this situation will always be.
Yeah, and it's what a lovely way to end. We end on that freeze frame, and unfortunately, Adam, our time is up. It's been an absolute joy to talk to you. There's so many other things I want to ask you about the novel, and about what you're working on next and so on, but we're going to have to leave it there. So thank you so much for sharing so generously with us today, and thank you to JLF.
Thank you, Adam Foulds and Elaine Canning, for this insightful and productive conversation. It really was brilliant. It transported us completely to a different world. We'd like to thank the European Union for supporting this session, and our celebration partner, Diageo. Thank you all for watching and being such a great audience, and please stay logged on to continue to watch with us a series of exciting sessions featuring a stellar list of speakers that have been specially curated for you and brought to you straight from Jaipur's Diggy Palace. As you're aware, the cultural sector has been enormously impacted over this past few months. And as you also know, artists and artisans only can earn if they perform or they're able to sell something. We really need your support to continue to bring you a free flow of knowledge and ideas. Please, right now, press the contribute button and help us stay afloat. Any contribution is more than welcome. Please tweet using Jaipur Literature Festival 2021 and at Jaipur Lit Fest. The festival is protected by Dettol. Hope to see you at the next session.